Welcome back. That was the tree lighting ceremony at the Capitol last night, a lovely sight.
Did you go?
I didn't, actually.
Where were you?
You know, you've been waiting all day for that, haven't you? Actually, last night I was in Washington doing the Jim Trafficant show. So it's 2 nights ago, guys, 2 nights ago.
He's great. I have all his albums.
Yeah. He is. So, all right. Should we introduce our guests? What the heck? Although you may not recognize their names or faces, you're probably familiar with our guests' work. They're speechwriters for some of the nation's top politicians, the behind-the-scenes guys who are responsible for making the likes of Bill Clinton, Al Gore, Bob Dole, James Baker, and others appear funny. Not funny looking, but funny ha-ha. Mark Katz made his name on the national political scene during the 1988 Dukakis campaign, where he secured his place in history as the man who made Mike Dukakis so hilarious. And Landon Parvin was a speechwriter for Nancy and Ronald Reagan, who's gone on to ghostwrite for both Republicans and Democrats, a bipartisan funny guy. Welcome, both of you, to Equal Time.
You're both nice to be here.
First-timers. Yeah. So, Landon, how'd you get into writing funny speeches?
Well, it's not something you set out to do. How I started was I was doing a humor column for Roll Call, which is a Capitol Hill paper, and politicians started coming to me to punch up their speeches, and I saw how bad their speeches were, so I just started writing their speeches, too.
You figured you had nothing to lose?
Nothing to lose.
They couldn't be any less funny?
Right.
So there you were.
One thing led to another, and I ended up being one of Reagan's speechwriters.
Did you work in the White House?
I worked in the White House, and then I left and was a consultant from the outside.
Did you work on other things besides humor when you were there? Or
oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
So you had to write, like, you'd go from, like, you know, take down this wall, Mr. Gorbachev, to something funny?
We rotated. I mean, I usually got all the humor things, but I did the serious things as well. And most of what I do now is serious.
Yeah.
And now, Mark, you actually have a book coming out. You are...
I do have a book. It's the first book I've read or written, so this is a milestone for me.
That's good. That's good. Now, you were recently famous for making Al Gore funny at the, what was that, the Gridiron?
White House Correspondence.
That was Gridiron 2 years ago. I worked on that speech, but that was a success story waiting to happen. You know, it's a secret around Washington that Al Gore is very funny, and when I worked on that speech...
It's a deeply kept secret.
Well, I was given security clearance, and then we got it declassified, and now it's well known.
Right. Who was it your idea to have him wheeled out there on a hand truck?
You know, that's classified comedy material, and I can't divulge any of that.
Why I asked it is he is funny. He's been on this show, and he's been on others. He showed us something. But what about either of you guys? Is there some politicians that just cannot deliver a line, no matter how funny it is? And who would those people be? Or just tell the kind of person.
I'll tell you a funny story, actually, about that. I'm sure you have them as well, too. One of the first speeches I worked on a speech for someone who was not comfortable with humor. And when we went over it for the first time, it was as though the person were on a rack recanting. You know, it was quite painful, and I was very nervous. And I said, okay, we got to do something. And I brought in a friend of mine who's very funny and a stand-up and a performer, and he got up and delivered the speech. And then this person got up and then did a very good impersonation of this person doing the speech. And
role-playing.
Yeah, it was, and it just worked. I didn't even know. I didn't figure out ahead of time why it was brilliant, but afterwards I realized
that it was.
Yeah.
So did the person laugh when they saw the first guy, your friend, give the speech? So they knew it was funny.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's
so
good.
Anybody can deliver humor.
No. and not everyone should be expected to. I mean, these are powerful people, and they get to where they are by not being funny. And I don't care how important they are, once they get in front of a group and have to be funny, they feel vulnerable. A friend of mine said doing comedy is like standing up and turning around naked and saying, "What do you think?" I mean, you're vulnerable. And they never really get over that.
Now, how do you deal with, in Washington, humor is a very tricky thing. You know, if you go just a little bit too far, you go from a laugh to a ooh, and that's a very bad thing.
And in Washington, the people enjoy giving the ooh more than they enjoy giving the laugh, which is why it's so perilous.
You know who this happens to a lot? Both of you guys know this. At the infamous White House Correspondents' Dinner, they always have out-of-town comedians, and if you're not totally on point.
Well, exactly. That dinner is like the front lines of you know, politics. Like the Gridiron is the demilitarized zone, and we've talked about, you know, what different atmosphere you have in those two rooms between the Gridiron, which is the smaller events and the White House Correspondents' Dinner, which are live on C-SPAN, and people are taking notes, and if you screw up, you're going to see it on CNN later that day.
What is it that's peculiarly hard about Washington humor?
Well, it's a subset of political humor. If you watch Leno or Letterman, they have much more freedom. They can be much tougher. In Washington, if you're standing up there and the president's on this side and Gingrich is on this side, and you're making jokes about them, you're going to have to deal with them the next week. And so there's a line that these are people you work with. And so in that sense, political humor Washington humor is tougher because you don't. Comedians can try their material out on the road. These gridiron dinners, White House Correspondents, you open and close the same night.
Right.
And I find it so, I'm sorry, I just find it, as a brand, it's more tame than regular humor because the downside is much higher than the upside. A bad joke will haunt you forever. A good joke is gone in 8 seconds.
Right. Geez, and not to mention this is the PCest of PC towns. So we'll be right back with Katz and Parvin. Hang in there, Loopsters. We're back with Funny Guy speechwriters, Mark Katz and Lena Parvin. Okay, Lena, you are famous for many things, but one of them that the whole country knows is Nancy Reagan's image was improved immeasurably when you did Secondhand Rose. What is it about self-deprecating humor, or is it the leading kind of humor for politicians?
It's great humor for politicians because they can't get in too much trouble making fun of themselves. And what it says is, I may be important, but look, I can make fun of myself. I'm not rigid. I'm really just like you.
Is it hard to get some politicians to do that, particularly where the real wound, the real sort of vulnerability is?
I always have to, when I explain this to people I work with the first time usually, I always tell the same story, which is the 1960 gridiron where John Kennedy was running for president, hadn't been elected, or maybe just elected, I can't remember the chronology, got up and read a telegram and said, John, don't spend $1 more than is necessary. I'll be damned if I'm going to pay for a landslide. Love, Dad. And then I say, well, if you were an opponent of John Kennedy, what could you have said that, if you had read that same telegram, he would have been decimated. But the fact that John Kennedy stood up and read that, he was completely inoculated on that topic. And if he could joke about it, then it was fine. And there's nothing you could say that could hurt him. And it just took it off the table. And President Reagan did the same thing with his, lines about hard work or the age issue with Walter Mondale. You're done. Next topic.
If I'm worried that something is too vulnerable, what I'll do is, when the staff is out of the room, say to the politician, are you comfortable making fun of this? Because there are areas where...
Sure. Everybody has that. How do you vet the humor? I mean, there's things that that you think are funny, or things you think are really funny, but might be a little too close to the line.
That's a good question.
That's why political humor is a different breed.
Right.
It goes through, when we do a speech, and I work with a lot of people when we work on these different speeches, when the speech season comes up. And a lot of people, we're bouncing ideas, and we go through the process of the people who need to see it before it gets to the big room.
Right.
Stuff gets nixed. It's just a political
That's
reality.
one of the worst things I think you can do is vet a speech and send it to committee. When I work with someone, we do a script, and the speaker and I will go over it. If there's a question about a line, then we'll take it to someone else to get an opinion. But I think you lose the personality of the speaker, which is really what you're trying to do if you get a committee involved.
Right.
Do you ever try to talk somebody into keeping a line, though, like a president, for example, into keeping a line that you know is going to be funny?
I learned my lesson not to, because I talked a couple of people into lines. Everyone said, oh, they're great lines, they'll bring down the house. Problem was the speaker didn't believe in it, and if they don't believe in it, they're not going to deliver it properly.
How about the other way around, though? They have a line that you just don't think is funny, and you're like, that's not funny.
That's a tricky area, and we've had...
They're the president.
No, I think I haven't had any problem with that. If you fight for something that you know is going to bomb, I mean, they'll listen. No one wants to bomb on these things.
Now, do you think our field right now, the Republican field, sort of has a dearth of humor out there?
Well, there's not a great deal in Washington funny right now. The emotions are so raw that...
So you wouldn't advise them to try to be funny then?
There are times when I don't think you want to be funny. And this may be one of the times.
But yet, I think this upcoming silly season, as Landon and I call it, is going to be a great year for humor because there's so much, you know, the ideology is exposed and the tempers are running a little hotter, and that makes the call for humor all the greater.
And the opportunity, I think, for self-deprecating humor.
Absolutely.
You know, especially because the sides have gotten so dug in.
That's right, and it allows you to remove yourself from the process. It lets the person, you know, speak instead of the persona, and that's why politicians enjoy these opportunities so much because they get, you know, it's just an opportunity to show a little humanity and speak, you know, genuinely as opposed to within the confines of their political, you know, box that they're in.
See, what I was talking about, though, was not the private dinners for the humor. I was talking about the humor we would use in a soundbite. And this is a time of the way tensions are right now. I think that could backfire. I would be cautious about that.
There's too many really serious issues at stake. Bosnia, troops on the ground, you know.
It makes it all the more important to let a little air out. I mean, I'm really looking forward to this next couple months with this season coming up. Because I think, you know, this is a historic time, and I think that's the theme. I always find thematic humor is better than topical humor, and we're dealing with a lot of themes where they're right on the surface. You know, how we run our government. We're talking about a lot of important issues, and for humor, that means, you know, getting to playing with the ideas behind the ideology and having fun with them.
Right.
How many are in your profession? I mean, because it seems like.
We're looking at the entire club right here.
You know, I'm always talking to people who are funny and trading lines with them, and when we work on the speeches, I'm reaching out to a lot of people.
There are no shortage of people like in Hollywood who are writers who want to contribute a line
so many,
or two.
when we do these speeches, you know, so many people are so generous with their time and their talent, and I'm on the phone with them.
Is your talent expensive? Just generally.
Well, not as expensive.
I'm living indoors and I'm eating regularly, so you know those are my minimum threshold.
I can't think of anything more valuable to have a good joke in a speech. I'd pay anything
to start a
for it.
speech. There have been more than one time when I've been begging at Katz's feet, begging for his cast-offs, and he's given generously. On the front page of the Wall Street Journal yesterday, congratulations. We're out of time, gentlemen, believe it or not. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Tune in Monday when we welcome first-timer Paul Gigot of the Wall Street Journal. We'll talk about the budget, Bosnia, presidential politics, and much, much more. Rivera Live is up next. Have a great weekend. We'll see you next week. Good night.
Paul's real funny, too. Send us jokes. We need them for our speeches.
we need jokes. Send them
in.
A little humor goes a long way on the campaign trail. A good joke can warm up the coldest audience, take the sting out of the sharpest criticism. But as politicians know all too well, it's tough to be funny on demand. And that's where our guest comes in, a political humor consultant, Mark Katz. He knows how to get a laugh and how to avoid a groan. Among his prominent clients, the team of Clinton and Gore. Mark Katz, how do you make a politician funny? Or is it a matter of working with whatever that human being has?
Well, I don't think you can make a politician funny. You have to find out what their natural sense of humor is and work with that. Socrates, I don't know if you ever saw his resume. He described his job once as being the midwife to other people's ideas. And I think my job description is similar. I help people find the way to express their own sense of humor.
Does a politician have to be able to laugh at himself or herself to be a good student of your material?
The first rule of political humor is self-deprecation, and the second rule after that is repeat as necessary. It's very important to laugh at yourself because it shows your sense of perspective about the circumstance and your position of power, and that's very reassuring to people, and an important quality to have in a job where your moniker is leader of the free world.
What about the way a person laughs? I have in mind President Bill Clinton with Russia's President Boris Yeltsin meeting in Hyde Park, New York. We're going to take a look at this scene. The president's face is turning red. He's fighting back tears. He's leaning on President Yeltsin. He's wiping tears from his eyes, and it's clear that this man has been hit in the stomach and is just roaring with laughter.
You know, President Yeltsin found out something that day that I had the privilege to learn, which is if you can make President Clinton laugh, you've hit the mother lode. His laugh fills the whole room, which says a lot about his own genuine sense of humor and why working on these speeches that I help out in just a couple times a year is such a joy, because his own enthusiasm and love for humor comes through in these speeches.
So when you saw that scene that we just saw here in Inside Politics, that inspired you?
It was a familiar scene because I've seen him laugh that hard, and that knowing that he is capable of laughing that hard is a great inspiration.
Well, you've been in the Oval Office, you and your mom, and meeting with the president. Have you laughed at things you couldn't possibly talk about on television?
Well, there is such a thing as classified comedy material, but no, it's all in good fun, and we have a lot of fun doing these speeches. Again, it's just a couple speeches a year that I work on, but they're a great, it's a great time for me, and he enjoys it a lot too, I think. We have a lot of laughs, and it's a great honor for me.
What about this appearance before the Radio Television Correspondents' annual dinner and the president with one presidential joke?
This is the symbol of my administration. This is a cross between a spoon and a fork. No more false choice between the left utensil and the right utensil. This is not an ideological choice. This is a choice in the middle and a choice for the future. This is a big new idea, the spork.
Yeah.
The mechanics of that joke.
The mechanics of that joke. That joke is having fun with the ideas behind the ideologies and helping to define him politically, as well as having fun with the topic of the day, which, you know, a large part of his political message is the third way and a new kind of Democrat, and a non-traditional Democrat. And that humor made that point, which is his way of looking at things is neither left nor right, but a third way. And we found the symbol of that, the spork, and you remember that school lunches were also a big part of last year's political dialogue. And we just had all the fun in the world with it. In fact, right after the speech, he and Speaker Gingrich posed with the spork as a common, something of common ground between the two of them.
Thinking about other occupants of the Oval Office, I'm wondering, I'm going to ask you two questions. One, we know that Ronald Reagan had a sense of humor. He was funny, and I'm wondering whether his actor's career and show business experiences gave him a leg up on other occupants of the Oval Office.
Well, you know, the tele-presidency is a whole new breed of presidency. I mean, I've read about Thomas Jefferson had a terrible sense of humor, but he never had to do a live press conference. Yes, that training he had was invaluable, and he and President Kennedy, as I've read, I wasn't there at the time, raised the bar, the threshold level of presidential humor tremendously. Prior to that, presidents only had to exceed the humor content of Calvin Coolidge.
Would you like to work with Jerry Fort, President Gerald R. Fort?
He did a lot of, you know, yes. Anyone who has low expectations for humor has a great potential to be very funny, I find. And Saturday Night Live did a good job with him, and he did some good stuff in response to himself to present himself in a fun way.
Very candidly, who just does not have it, is totally unfunny?
That, again, is classified. But some people, certainly some people are better than others. I mean, there's no two ways about that. But you can find on any given person, you can find what makes them laugh. And if you work hard enough and figure out, every person has a sense of humor. And politicians, I've found, are a lot like people. And if you keep that in mind, you find out what makes them funny, you can help express that to others.
Mark Katz, thank you. Look forward to your material in 1996, this new year.
Happy New Year, Bernie.
Thank you. Same to you.
So, it's a good one. You keep that one. All right. All right, now, ladies and gentlemen, before we go on, I have to I have to tell you some very distressing news. It seems that Oldie has just encountered his first major obstacle on his journey to Atlanta, and very sad. Can we make out how Oldie's doing? Do you have the tape there? seriously bumming everybody out tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a quick break, feel better about ourselves. When we come back, David Anthony Higgins will be here. We'll see you in a second.